over the past few years, we've been hosting this career forum, and typically in the past we have had focus on federal careers, but we're in a weird time right now. And so we talked with our federal folks from the CSU, and they too were on board with had a little transition toward focus on other kinds of careers that are out there across state, local agencies, NGOs, the corporate world, tribal partnerships, and so forth. And so our panelists today represent those different diversity of different kinds of careers that some of you might be thinking about and want to know more about. So that's what we're up to today. And I did also want to call out Paige Kleindl. She's a PhD student in my lab who is she's the assistant for our South Florida Caribbean Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Unit, as well as the president of our FCE LTER student group. So she's been heavily engaged in both networks, and she's really helped foster this program and today's event. So I hope you find it meaningful for you, and please be ready with questions for our panelists, and there'll be plenty of time to chat. So thank you.
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much, Marty and Evelyn, for that wonderful introduction. I will also say that if you have specific questions for a specific panelist, maybe just put their name first with a dash, but otherwise just place your questions that you may have in the chat, and we'll field them to whoever we feel is right, or to all the panelists. So without further ado, we have some really amazing panelists today that are going to be giving some really great overviews of their positions, maybe how they got to their position, what they do, what the day in a life is like. And they're just going to share a lot about what is unique about their position, and maybe why they love it and why they do what they do. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our first panelist, Curtis Osceola, and he is the Senior Executive Policy Advisor for the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida.
All right. Thanks, Paige. And I love the, Evelyn, I loved your background. That's actually the Everglades, the Ridge and Slough area of the Everglades. So it's my backyard.
It sure is. Yeah, I know, it's our playground too. It's wonderful.
So my name's Curtis Osceola. I'm a member of the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida, and I currently serve as the Senior Executive Policy Advisor to Chairman Talbert Cypress. I was formerly his Chief of Staff, and I've been working in this role for a few weeks now. And what I focus on mainly is policy matters related to federal, state, and local legislation, as well as building networks and coordinating the efforts of the tribe, its departments, coordinating some of our partners, both in the public and private sector, and also coordinating and liaising with the NGO communities that we often work with. And so when I put this together, I kind of wanted to give you an idea of what my job entails. And so first thing is advocacy. I'm always giving advice. I'm always being a sounding board for leadership, not just to the chairman, but also to his executive committee, which includes his chief operations officer, his chief financial officer, chief sustainability infrastructure office, and public safety, as well as information. So, this is a pretty, I have a lot of vertical exposure, meaning I see the top of the top at the executive level, and I see also kind of the operations level, and I try to bring the concerns and the issues that we have as a government to the fore via legislation or via lobbying efforts to various legislatures, whether it's the Miami-Dade Commission, the Florida Congress, both the House and the Senate, or the governor's office, and then also including Washington, D.C., the U.S. House and Senate and the executive branch. So, that takes a lot of planning. And so in my role, there's a ton of strategic planning and coordination. I'm on the phone a lot. Sometimes I pull my hair out, but the job has to get done. Somebody's got to do it. So, I've kind of carried over some of my roles as chief of staff into this current role as policy advisor. I'm trying to stay a little bit more high level now. So I'm focusing more on lobbying, network building. So, attending events, building relationships with, the different sectors, providing services to some of our partners and colleagues, providing courtesies to some of our partners and colleagues, and then also, doing strategic development, meaning giving, gift giving, and nonprofit work. And so that's an important component of what I do. And then sort of on the granular level, a lot more problem solving and conflict resolution. And then sometimes, being a leader in terms of being a change leader, I think definitely it takes up most of my time, at the granular level. Is just encouraging people that they can make decisions on their own and letting them know that they have the support of the administration. So I wanted to give a couple of examples, like the strategic planning versus problem solving, to give you an idea of kind of how that thought process works. So, the roles that I gave you, they kind of conflict sometimes and interact. And so, a lot of times you're making a plan, but your plan's not going to really work out the way you think it will ever. So you have to be adaptable, you have to be unwavering, and you have to be, like the second slide says, you have to get stakeholder buy-in. You want to make things simple when you're trying to get things done, and understanding the dynamics of the organization and utilizing people as partners and not as tools is going to really lift you up as an advisor or as someone who works in the policy space. And then also realizing that you don't know everything, and people with subject matter knowledge do, and lifting them up and including them in those high-level conversations so that, they feel empowered, that they are part of the decision-making process, the planning process, and the decision-making process. Then there's problem solving and conflict resolution, which is similar, but it's, I think, more, it takes some more of your soft skills, like patience, understanding that people need to be heard and that they need to understand solutions more than you do. Listening, processing what your peers say, sampling your responses, and then acting on those responses. So it's a 4-step process that I implement often. And, it speaks for itself, right? You're just, a lot of times when you're problem solving or you're in a moment when you have to resolve conflict, you don't have a lot of time. And so having kind of some principles that you can go by and stick to is helpful when you need to take action, particularly when it comes to a policy matter. And then also staying focused on the mission or vision of your leadership. And then again, staying principled, using tenets as guideposts is important, and not flexibility, I think, is key in terms of working in the policy space. So I wanted to provide this sort of context. A lot of people, I think, don't understand fully the way that the lobbying space works and how it interacts with Congress, the executive branch. And so this is called the Iron Triangle. And so you'll see it, if anyone who's, done public policy or anything like that, you'll understand that there's sort of this movement in between interest groups, like, say, the Miccosukee tribe is an interest group, right? So we're going to support candidates. We're going to lobby for specific issues. And we're going to, give that to staff members. We're going to give that to the administration and the executive branch. They're going to advance those choices and execute those decisions with our consultation. And then Congress is going to get that and say, okay, well, here's what happened. Do we want to change anything? And then, of course, our support and lobbying goes to Congress as well. And that's to influence legislation and provide oversight for the input that we've given the administration, as well as the bureaucracy under it. So just kind of a short a short explanation of the Iron Triangle. But you can read a lot more about this. There's a lot of political theory on it. But in action, it works. It doesn't work all the time. And I'm sure you're familiar with some of the more infamous times it doesn't work. When you have things like public corruption and bribery schemes, and we see like I think what was it, one of the senators from New Jersey, got caught with gold bars in his safe, and that's corruption at the highest level, and it's it's infrequent, but the times when it does happen, it's very, very loud, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen. So just a broad overview of what that looks like. And then at the end, just wanted to provide some literature. I think that if you're interested in the policy space or in advocacy, strategic advocacy, lobbying, that kind of thing, these are some authors and some books that I strongly recommend that I think would provide a little bit more context to concepts like negotiation, power brokering, and also providing historical context for why we are here. So I think that's what I got.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Curtis. That was a really great presentation and overview of your position. If you have any questions specifically for Curtis, please feel free to drop them in Q&A. And now we're going to move on to our next presentation, an overview by Morgan Ivens-Duran, who is the Senior Environmental Scientist Supervisor for California Fish and Wildlife.
Thanks, Paige. And yes, I am a Senior Environmental Scientist Supervisor at CDFW. We have many. So just to say that, and specifically, I work for CDFW's Marine Region, which oversees basically everything about the ocean from Oregon to Mexico. California state waters extend to about 3 nautical miles offshore, and then depending on the issue, sometimes our jurisdiction extends out to the edge of the exclusive economic zone, which is 200 miles offshore. So we have a very broad scope within Marine Region. Specifically, my current position is with our habitat conservation program. And I do not have any slides. So you all better just to look at my face the next several minutes. So yes, my current position is as a senior supervisor, but I did spend my first 8 or so years at CDFW as an environmental scientist. I promoted to my current supervisory role last summer. Moving into my current position has changed a whole lot about the day-to-day of my job. And in sort of preparing for this panel, I thought a lot about, what might be the most valuable. And for all 50-ish of you who are here coming out of a graduate program, it's far more likely, if you were looking for jobs in state service in California, that you would be applying either for an environmental scientist position, which is what I did for many years, or a senior environmental scientist specialist position, than a supervisory role right out the gate. So I'm going to focus a lot of my sort of introductory comments here on what we would call rank and file positions, which would include environmental scientists and senior specialists. But I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that folks have about, operating at that supervisory level as well. So in terms of what a typical day looks like, and this is one of the things that I like to share so folks aren't surprised later on, this is an office job. Pretty much. There's a lot of emails, there's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of preparing and review of documents. What exactly those look like can vary quite a bit, but they might be things like briefing memos for management, talking points for someone who's going to present at a formal public meeting, pulling together like a regulatory package if we are introducing new state regulations or we're updating current state regulations, bill analyses that go to the governor's office on legislation that's been introduced, conditions for permits, operating manuals for programs that we run, public-facing summaries of work products of programs that we run. So it's a lot of writing, it's a lot of reading, it's a lot of sitting at a desk doing email and in meetings. And so all that said, certain positions will do more field work out in the world than others, but just in general, these are going to be office jobs. you're much more likely to travel for a training or for a meeting than you are to go out in the field. And one of the documents, and I'll talk a little bit about the state hiring process towards the end, that goes out when we post a job includes something that we call a duty statement, which describes like what exactly you would be doing in that position. And that duty statement should give you a good sense of like how much of this is going to be field work versus not. I know it's something that a lot of us in the natural resource and science space like to be in the field. And so that's just something I like to share right off the gate is, most of these types of positions are going to be a pretty office heavy situation. In terms of sort of like how your week looks and sort of like work-life balance for rank and file staff, this is one of the things that's changed about my day job, but for rank and file staff, you have a union contract that says you work 40 hours a week. And that is pretty much always going to be the case. There's certain circumstances, operational need, maybe you'll occasionally work longer, but in general, it's going to be 40 hours. And that tends to support like a pretty healthy work-life balance. You have standard hours that you work almost all of the time. In terms of pay ranges, those are all publicly available. You can look them up on the CalHR website. Every type of state job, you can look and see how much you get paid. So for environmental scientist positions, we have 3 ranges where you can start A, B, or C, depending on your prior experience. And you move through that salary range until you sort of qualify for the next level. For me, coming into state service with my master's degree and a year of specific relevant work experience, I started at range B. Depending on sort of what you're coming with, maybe you would start somewhere else. So for me, in terms of sort of how I got to where I am now, I did my undergraduate, got my bachelor's in marine biology at Brown University, which is where I met Marty many years ago, and then got my master's in biological sciences at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. And after that, I was unemployed for 5 months. It was really exciting. I was working 35 hours a week at unpaid science internships, trying to get my act together. And then very fortunately, started a California Sea Grant State Fellowship at the California Ocean Protection Council in Sacramento. And if you are interested in anything that is in the science, policy, resource management nexus in the state of California, I highly recommend looking at that program and considering applying for that fellowship. And I'll put a link in the chat. It's was an extraordinarily valuable learning opportunity, really helped set me up for success with all of the things that have come since then. So I'll put that link when I'm done talking, and happy to chat more about that opportunity. Towards the end of my fellowship, I accepted my first environmental scientist position at CDFW, and I did 2 lateral moves before I started my current position. So I've had a total of 4 positions within the marine region so far, all of them based in Monterey. Coming out of grad school, I knew what I really wanted to do was applied science work and use my scientific training and expertise to help move policy and management forward. Being on the inside of the state bureaucracy, the pace of change can be slow. Nothing is happening overnight. This is not the private sector. But I wanted to be on the inside, sort of helping to directly inform the decisions that were being made about ocean policy and natural resource management in California. The specific details of what my day-to-day looks like and the particular challenges have changed with sort of each of the 4 positions that I've held. But, at the end of the day, sort of this general space, there have been a lot of similarities, and that has been really valuable and rewarding for me. So one of the prompts that we got was things that I wish I had known or done in grad school. And so a couple of things I wanted to share. So the first is, I wish that I had done more programming, taken more classes, gotten more exposure to like data science and modeling and all that kind of stuff, especially with things like R. I'd had a smattering of that coming into my position, and it's certainly not a requirement, but depending on, it will make you a more competitive candidate for a lot of these types of jobs. It's not a skill set that we see super often. And I've seen like an increasing need and value for it in the 9+ years that I've spent at CDFW so far. Another thing is, whether it's coursework or direct experience with conflict resolution, negotiation, project management, time management, like those types of soft skills will be at least as valuable as the technical expertise that you bring to the table, and is really going to set you apart from someone else who has like the same sort of, coursework or research type experience. The other thing I would say is that I think before coming to the state, I had this vision that like I would take this state job and I would spend the next 30 years doing the exact same thing. And I would just be locked into this very narrow box. And that is absolutely not how it goes. I can't speak for every state agency, but certainly at CDFW and certainly within the Marine region where I've been, there's lots of room to grow. There's lots of space to take on new types of work. And as I've done, lateral moves, promotions, all of that. I have definitely done a whole host of things in my time here. Another is to just, when you're looking at career options, looking at job prospects, to not be afraid to just go for it. The worst thing that happens is you apply for something and you don't get it. You never know who you're competing against, what the rest of the candidate pool looks like, and what the hiring manager is looking for. You might be the most qualified candidate, but you'll never know if you screen yourself out before you even put your application in. Now, doing thoughtful job applications is a time-consuming process, right? So you can't go for every single thing all the time. But if you say, oh, that looks cool, that would be fun, and then you read the qualifications list and you're like, but I don't have this, and I don't have this, and I don't have this, and I don't have this. What's the harm in putting one out there? And the last thing is people in general like to talk about their own journey to where they are. You have 6 panelists who are all spending 2 hours on our Wednesday chatting with all of you. So, the value of the informational interview, finding someone who does something cool that you would like to do someday, or you want to learn more about how they got there. Most people are going to be flattered and happy to set up like a 30 or 45 minute, call with you. And when you do successfully schedule an informational interview, to come with like specific questions, not just tell me about yourself or like, how did you get here? But like, just some prep. It's a much more fun experience for the person who's spending that time with you. The last sort of chunk of things I want to talk a little bit about is how you get a job with the state, because this is one of those sort of opaque things that I didn't understand until someone explained it to me. And so whenever I have an opportunity to talk with folks who are maybe interested, I like to share a couple of sort of nuggets of wisdom, and that'll be my last little bit for my intro. So the first thing is that all state jobs are advertised within what we call a classification. So like my classification now is Senior Environmental Scientist Supervisor, Senior Environmental Scientist Specialist, Environmental Scientist. Those are all different classifications. And you need to be on what we call an eligibility list before you can apply for a job. And I'll put this link in the chat as well. CalCareers is our career website. Every single state job for all of California gets posted there. And that'll have information about how you take what we call an exam to get on the eligibility list. Those exams will look different depending on what classification you're trying to qualify for. So for my environmental scientist job and my current job, it's like a really poorly constructed resume builder. I don't know if anyone's ever applied for something on USA Jobs. It's kind of a similar experience to that, but you put a bunch of stuff in and then you hit submit, and then the magic scores it and gives you a number, and that tells you whether you've passed or not. The only other state exam I've taken is the Coastal Program Analyst exam, which is what the California Coastal Commission and Bay Conservation Development Commission hire off a lot. And that's at least when I took it 10 plus years ago, that's you go sit in an office in front of a 3-judge panel and you answer questions about the Coastal Act. So they take a lot of different flavors, but you need to be on the eligibility list before you apply for the job. the default posting window for most state jobs is 2 weeks. So if you wait until you see a job that's posted and then you try to take the exam, you might miss that opportunity. You also always start at the bottom of the pay scale. So there's like a range that's posted for the job. There's no negotiating. Like you always start at the bottom. This is not, again, the private sector. This is state government. And so that's just something to know. You know, the hiring manager can't do anything for you. The benefits are what the benefits are. The pay is what the pay is. Like that is the deal. And the last thing I'll say is like, just to be patient. There is so much internal process on our end, like before we can move through each of this like very specific structured set of steps. There are things that require like HR up in Sacramento to sign off on stuff before like you can do anything. And it's not uncommon for 2 or even 3 months to pass between the date you submitted an application and hearing anything at all about how it went. So don't give up and be patient. You know, the vast majority of folks who are trying to hire, like they have a vacant position. Like someone used to do that job and they're not there anymore and they want to fill it as fast as they can, but like it's the state bureaucracy. So that is the end of my introductory remarks, and I'll put a couple links in the chat and I'm happy to answer questions when we get to that portion.
Thank you so much, Morgan, for your wonderful overview and for all that helpful information. We really appreciate it. And please, attendees, add your questions in the question and answer space as we're going through the different presentations. And so next we have Jennifer Tisthammer, who is a program manager, does program managing and grants coordinating for the Miami-Dade County Office of Management and Budget. So I'll pass it over to her.
Gotta unmute.
There we go. We're working through multiple screens here. Let's go from the beginning. We got that. We got this. I think that we're good. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for colleagues. I think we're all bringing sort of a different path, a different perspective to this. And I'll start out more focusing on a path. And I think it's because I have a very diverse path. I did not come to environmental studies right out of high school, right into undergraduate. I kind of came here as a mid-career individual. And so I want to talk through some of that, and because I think there's some interesting lessons that I've learned, just being reflective. A little bit about me and my path. I'm a first-generation college student. And for me, that means that I had no predetermined path to follow. I started out in finance with a business administration degree because I was good at math, critical thinking, and analysis, and that was a place to start. But as I got deeper into the business world, I realized I was more interested in social service issues, and led very much with my heart and my passions in my career choices. That led me to move away from banking into nonprofit work, which I loved. I later returned to finance for the higher paycheck, but also, felt unfulfilled. Eventually, I launched my own consulting firm, focusing on the business side of nonprofits. That gave me a great work-life balance at that time, too. I was also a relatively new mom. Because of those roles, at the request of a friend, I stepped into the Deering estate, first as a consultant, then deputy director, then director. Then my role expanded within Miami-Dade County to our chief of conservation of several units, several enterprise units, including the University of Florida Agricultural Extension, the county's nature centers and campgrounds, natural areas management, our sea turtle conservation unit, and our coastal management team, fruit and spice park, the Deering estate. It was a huge title and a very big role. I would say my work-life balance was there was none. There was work and my interest in our environment. And during that time, because I'm a lifelong learner, and at different times I stepped back and got my master's degree, as well as am currently working on my PhD. So those are some, those are some of the things that have shaped me. My public service interests throughout my career are very consistent. But what has changed most is that in my later career, public service, very similar to what Curtis was saying, is really focusing on how decisions get made. I'm very strongly interested in social justice, environmental justice. In particular, that drove a lot of my desire to go back and get my PhD. I'm focusing on policy, procedure, how knowledge and science is produced, is in part and very much a part of a strategic shift for me. For the next phase of my career, which is still revealing itself. So I'm speaking to you guys now as sort of, I'll call it like either my third or fourth act in my career path. My academics have always supported my career path. My career path has always supported my academics. I think as Morgan spoke, she talked about talked about sort of this applied approach. While formal teaching and learning is always going to be a part of my future life path in many ways, and there are many ways to learn, share what you learn, help educate the field, co-produce knowledge to better systems. I focus a lot on system structures and relationships, and ultimately, again, and you see that sort of heartfelt purpose, and it's where I try and align my passions with my purpose. I am ultimately trying to benefit people in the planet. What my current job entails, currently I work in the Office of Management and Budget for Miami-Dade County, where I lead a very specialized team. And I work with 32 of our county departments, so Seaport, Aviation, Derm, Parks, Homeless Trust. Our team writes and secures grants. We bring in about $250 million a year in grant funding, and then we also coordinate about a $6.2 billion federal, state, and local grant portfolio for the county. So now I have a small title, but like this crazy huge role. When I stepped into this position, I thought I would be much more involved with writing and editing grants. My broad background in the environment and the arts, capital planning, operations, fiscal management makes me a strong sort of grant writer and editor. I love it. How that's changed, though, is I find myself working more with our Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. I spend a lot of my time managing or advising our mayor on our grants portfolio, advising and working with our departments, our different county departments strategically on broader bases of funding, which includes our state appropriations, our earmarks, particularly in this transitioning environment where we're seeing federal funding kind of paused in most cases in cancellations. For the record, with all of the, I'll call it noise that's going on, we've only had 4 of our grants within the county actually canceled. We've seen a number of pauses that have happened. And so, some of that analysis and pivoting is also a big portion of my life. I'm taking a specialized team, working with our departments and shifting at how we look at a fairly consistent funding landscape from the past, and how we transition and move us into the future. And where both my business background and environmental studies background, and now my global and social cultural studies background come into play, is these are also very specialized and general fields. I feel that in my career, it's been very important to have specialized skills. And so that deep dive into finance, the deep dive into nonprofits and governance, and the deep dive into public service and cultural and ecological resource management have been very strong things that I think with a non-traditional and non-linear path, I often struggled with, like, okay, where am I going in life? What am I doing? Oh, well, this next thing just looks fantastic and awesome, and let me try it. And it really took, I would say, probably in my early 30s, sitting down with a mentor and looking back over sort of the first 2/3 of my career then, and someone outside of my head and my heart saying, wow, Jennifer, when I look at your background, you're incredibly strong in sort of change leadership. And when I looked back at sort of my resume, I went, oh, goodness gracious. And I share that story because sometimes we get into either a predetermined path or we get into the weeds in terms of where we are. And those are great places to be. But a colleague, a mentor, a friend, a guide, or even just someone that you reach out to who you have an appreciation for their position, those informational interviews, yeah, I would say check. That's very important. Those things are important too in sort of framing and shaping yourself. And I mean, I know that I have had incredible guidance as I've spent time with others, both in my field and outside of my field, in sort of taking a look at where I am. I will share too, because my background is sort of this very, broad background, and yet I have a few areas of specific expertise. I have a 2-part, 2-page resume that one of my mentors helped me shape, and it's something to consider. It's not what you call a linear or chronological. So the first page is a chronological outline of my work experience, but the second page is a functional resume. And it focuses on major accomplishments and major areas of accomplishments. And it has been very helpful in transitioning from one career to the next. I will say, though, and this goes back to what has been offered as some advice in terms of informational interviews, and also building up some of your skill sets through internships and fellowships. I think that I only applied for two positions that I ended up getting very early on in my career. Most others have come out of the work that I've done, either in community organizations, nonprofit, or through those informational interviews. And I think that those are some things that we don't consider as strongly in our mix in the job search world. As I reflect too, and I do have my academics and my career path up on the slide. I don't want to go through that. But some of the things that I wish I had known very early on. One is, it's okay not to have a linear path, particularly in the beginning of your career. I have a 22-year-old now, and I've been able to share some of that with her as she's, going through her own life. I didn't follow a traditional route for a long time. I did feel I was rudderless. But now as I'm coming into, like I said, this third, fourth, or fifth act, depending on what you want to call it, I see like how all of that experience, in finance, nonprofit, cultural resource management have shaped me in ways that a straight path never would have. And I also feel very strongly that cross training is important. If you are going into resource management, you have to have a strong understanding of grants. I led some of the growth in the units that I had mentioned earlier through outside funding, not just earned revenue strategies, but by seeking innovative grant opportunities and partnerships. Financial management and budget preparation, the ways that I helped steward the resources at the Deering Estate and for the Parks Department for nearly 17 years of my life was, yes, having that critical understanding of our cultural and ecological resources, our environments, our habitats, the systems and structures that guide them and move them forward. But in many cases, that very practical and pragmatic approach to how things get done in either a private sector, government sector, or even nonprofit environment has been enormously helpful. And so to the extent that you can build those skills, I think are very important. I also think that your ability to work with contracts management, my contracts background from my financial services, sort of the early part of my career, both in commercial banking and with Merrill Lynch, became some of the most important skills for me when I had to draft the cooperative agreement with the county attorneys for 2 phases of our Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands project. And there was some language in these, very seminal contractual agreements that the Army Corps of Engineers, the state, and the South Florida Water Management District were proposing that would have strongly favored flood control over species and habitat. And from my perspective as a resource manager, could have the potential of causing harm. So understanding the difference between, wills and shalls and coulds and woulds in a contractual agreement, and how you leverage sort of public intervention and policy, I will say are the things that have helped guide me most in my resource management background. It's a little jokey and you can see how important this is to me, but those efforts that I spent for 6 months negotiating each of those contracts that are now permanently in place represent the most important 9 lines of text I ever wrote to date. And I could not have done that without my environmental science background and my cultural studies background. But I also could not have done that without that unique sort of experience in sort of our financial services world. Our sort of, and I'll kind of leave with some of these notes. Humans are not perfect, and our political, procedural, decision-making, and knowledge production systems that are created by humans are also not perfect. But having sort of an interdisciplinary skill that helps you navigate and be agile, both in your career and in the work that you do, I feel that those are critically important for anyone, and specifically for anyone who is on an environmental or resource management career path. A little bit of a plug, in my previous roles, I shamelessly recruit from both FIU students. I am now trying to be a triple alum, as I mentioned. I'm ABD on my doctorate right now. but I am happy to sit with anyone who reaches out to me, provide some of that career guidance and resume framing that was offered to me early on and at mid-career. And so please do reach out and, yeah, go Panthers.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It was great to hear about your winding but super successful career path, and I'm excited to see where it continues taking you. So thank you so much, and we're going to move on to our next panelist, Kate Wilkins, who is the Regional Conservation Director of the Denver Zoo Conservation Alliance.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to get this set up. Okay. Well, yeah, thank you all so much for joining this discussion today. I'm really excited to share how Denver Zoo collaborates to restore bison and grasslands in Colorado. Again, my name is Kate Wilkins. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm the Regional Conservation Director for Colorado, which, similar to Jennifer, I had kind of a winding path to this career. I started off in public relations and really loved the work that I got to do as part of that degree, and felt like I wanted to have a career that had more of an impact on the environment around us. And so I got an internship where I just took people out on trails and taught them about all the plants and animals that they could see on those trails. And that just, yeah, set me on a path to a career in ecology. And yeah, now I'm a grassland ecologist, which just means I'm obsessed with grasslands, which there's not a lot of people in Colorado, so I'm in Colorado. And I say that I moved here for the mountains, but I stayed for the grasslands. And grasslands just need a lot of help right now. Most people seem to look to the mountains of Colorado because they're amazing. They're super beautiful, and our grasslands are as well. So my work really focuses now on conserving and restoring those landscapes. And just a quick note about the photos in this slide. So these were all taken in August of 2021, I believe, in shortgrass prairie. So from the left to right, so shortgrass prairie, which is characteristic of the grasslands we have here in Colorado, obviously named for how short the vegetation is, up to mixed grass prairie, which is in the middle there in Kansas, and then tall grass prairie, which is also in Kansas, but much further east in Kansas at the Konza Prairie Long-Term Ecological Research Site. And for the work that I do now with Denver Zoo Conservation Alliance, I would like to acknowledge that the grasslands we work to restore are the ancestral homelands and current homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, Oceti-Sakowin, Lipa, and Apache, and 45 other tribes that lived in Colorado and continue to live in Colorado. So because we're a zoo, we don't own any property in Metro Denver. Even the land that the zoo is on, we lease from the city of Denver. And so we spend a lot of time building collaborations with the external partners who are landowners in Metro Denver. And specifically, one of our primary partners is Denver Mountain Parks, which is part of the city and county of Denver. And they have a property that is about 45 minutes south of Denver that's more of a foothills grassland landscape with bison. And my team is working to create self-sustaining, climate resilient, intact grassland habitats on this landscape that also have functioning ecosystem processes. And the ways that we're doing that are through managing and reintroducing wildlife, such as bison. Our biggest project right now involves reintroducing bison across a jurisdictional boundary. And Daniels Park sits within this larger landscape that is one of the largest conservation areas in Metro Denver, and it consists of around 9,200 acres, which is split up between Daniels Park, which is 1,000 acres, and an adjacent property called Highlands Ranch Backcountry Wilderness Area, which is the larger of the two at 8,200 acres. And so we're working with Highlands Ranch Backcountry Wilderness Area to just get bison from Daniels Park onto Highlands Ranch. And so we're starting off with a really small 200-acre pasture as a test pasture to see how it goes. And the fence for that is being constructed as we speak, which is really exciting because that's been one of the kind of longer processes that we've had to go through, is figuring out how to get this fencing constructed. The terrain out there is super variable. And so just working with the fencing company to even set a date for when it could start being constructed was really challenging. And it all worked out. So it's happening now. The other piece that we're working on with reintroducing animals involves reintroducing rainbow scarab dung beetles. And right now we're trying to focus on creating a breed and release program, which, as far as we know, would be one of the first of its kind with a native dung beetle breed and release program. There are other programs that have taken place in Texas and parts of Europe where they're reintroducing dung beetles from other parts of the world. And they've seen a lot of success with burying dung, getting nutrients put back into the soil. And so we're trying to do something similar, but with a native dung beetle. We've got a lot of issues with dung fouling, which is just where bison dung is just sitting out on the landscape. And dung beetles are hopefully a way to mitigate that and bury those nutrients, prevent a lot of nitrogen and other gases from heading up into the atmosphere. In addition, those dung beetles help to bury parasites that might be present in that dung. And so they just have lots of benefits. One of the other pieces that we're working on is controlling an invasive introduced plant species, which are a huge threat to native biodiversity across Colorado's open spaces and protected areas. And a lot of the invasive plants that we have include a grass called cheatgrass, which is an annual grass that just has really spiky seeds. And it's not really palatable to the bison or other animals that are out there. And it greens up really early in the season and can outcompete other plants that are trying to grow in an area. And so we're working to reduce the cover of that, as well as an invasive mustard that we have out here that's actually depicted in this photo that's in the middle of that top row under controlling introduced plants. So on the right side of that photo, that's all of that yellow alyssum, which is that mustard. And on the left side, that's an area that was actually treated with a restoration herbicide that we're using that's a pre-emergent. I'm happy to answer more questions about it. And that left side is all of that green that you see. It's mostly Western wheatgrass, which is a native perennial grass. And we see a reduction of introduced invasive annuals. It's like a 99.6% reduction in those. And that lasts for about 4 years. And so we're doing some studies also to monitor how this restoration herbicide is affecting plant communities. The next step that I would want to do in that is also to see how it's affecting arthropod communities. I think that is maybe a little less well studied than the plant community piece. So another piece that we're working on is removing gamble oak, which is a native plant which has become invasive in this landscape because of fire suppression. So gamble oak, historically, fires would move through this landscape. Animals like bison and elk would then come through after those fires and eat any new shoots that were coming up after the fire. And so it was just a really great way to keep gamble oak in check. And over the last 100 years, there's been a 21% increase in the coverage of gamble oak across Daniels Park. And that's taking up habitat for lots of grassland species, whether that's grassland birds or other animals, insects. And the way that it grows, it creates this really dense thicket. And it's hard for bison and other animals to move through as well. In addition, it creates a wildfire, it increases wildfire risk for surrounding communities of people that live near Daniels Park. So we're collaborating with the park to remove Gamble Oak and studying the effects of that removal through plant surveys, which are being conducted by a local university, and then we're leading bird surveys just to see whether or not that removal does help open up habitat for grassland obligate birds. One of the other parts that I'm excited about all of the work that I get to do. I actually feel super lucky that I still am so heavily involved in lots of field research. And one of the pieces that I think I'm most interested in to see the results of is a native plant restoration that we're doing in a prairie dog colony at Daniels. So prairie dog colonies are prevalent across the Front Range of Colorado, and unfortunately, they're confined to these really small spaces now just because of usually because of encroaching developments. And because of that, they don't have the space to move that they once did to find forage. And so they tend to overgraze areas that they're in. The other part to the prairie dog colony at Daniels is that bison also graze in that area and just love hanging out in the prairie dog colony. And yeah, I could go down a tangent onto why that is. There's been a lot of research to show that bison do tend to hang out more so on prairie dog colonies, and they very much do at Daniels Park as well. And so that area just gets a lot of activity. And one of our major research questions is trying to understand what's the best native seed mix for this area, and what can survive being grazed by both prairie dogs and bison. And we actually have a few little small exclosures set up where we exclude bison and prairie dogs. Another exclosure that only excludes bison, so it allows prairie dogs to come in, and then another plot that's just business as usual. And what I really want to see and understand is like what's growing well when we keep bison out, but allow prairie dogs to still be in that space, because it'll be a lot easier for us to suggest to the landowners like, hey, maybe just keep bison out of this area for 6 months and let these plants recover. They can still handle the prairie dog grazing, and maybe after that period of time you could let the bison back in. I think it would be a lot harder for us to recommend excluding bison and prairie dogs. In fact, I don't think that's actually an option. So ideally we could find plants that grow well under continued prairie dog grazing. And because of a lot of that grazing activity, there are issues then with erosion in that same area. And there are other factors that are contributing to that erosion, including a road that bisects the park, where water, it's on the top of a ridge line. And so water is just hitting that road and flowing off into this already kind of dry, overgrazed area. And so we're working on using these rock structures that are an indigenous technology from the southwestern United States to help slow the flow of that water across the landscape, allow soil to build up, and then hopefully allow plants to grow. And a key piece to this is also community engagement. So we engage communities, whether that's middle school students, corporate volunteers, even Denver Zoo staff, to come in and help construct some of these rock structures, as well as collect native seeds and spread those around the eroded areas. Okay. I just want to highlight also one of the projects that it has been just so amazing to work on. And this is one of our other big community engagement projects. And it involves a demonstration garden that we worked on with someone named Louis Talbell, who is Cheyenne and Arapaho and a member of the Talbell Memorial Council, which is an intertribal organization that has a small inholding of land within Daniels Park. And Louis came up with the design for this garden. He helped us come up with the plant list. And the idea is to have the Talbell Memorial Council be able to come and harvest plants in the garden once those plants have become established to use for either like ceremonies or medicinal purposes. and ultimately just trying to reconnect Native American communities in Metro Denver to land and traditional ecological knowledge. Okay, so I'll just, end with some of the benefits of the position. So with the work that I get to do, it provides me with a really deep sense of purpose. And I feel like I'm actively making an active difference for grassland ecosystems and human communities in Metro Denver. I've also had the opportunity to collaborate with so many amazing landowners and organizations, which have taught me about land stewardship from different lenses. And there's also just something really meaningful about working with local groups that are uniting behind a common cause. I also have an amazing team that I get to work with at Denver Zoo. And in my role, I do supervise a grasslands restoration coordinator and 2 interns who are funded through another local nonprofit who's aiming to provide paid conservation internships to community college students and students from Metro State University, which is a Hispanic serving institution. I still get to do field research, which is great. So May through, I would say, September, I am out in the field every week collecting data. And by the end of that, I'm ready to be back inside analyzing that data and doing more computer work. So I would say it's a good balance of inside office work and still getting to go outside and participate in field work. And so Denver Zoo Conservation Alliance is a popular Denver institution, and I get to interact with people that I might not get to if I was working in a more strictly science or conservation based institution. And that means that we get to talk to people who might just be conservation curious or literally just coming to the zoo because they want to look at animals with their family. And then we get them with conservation. We're like, but what about conservation? And there's a lot of people that get really excited to hear that the zoo is doing this type of work. In terms of challenges, because we are a nonprofit, resources are always a challenge. And there's a lot of grant writing that is part of this position. Thankfully, we also have an entire philanthropy team that helps us with writing grants. It's very different than graduate school where you're sort of doing everything on your own. And I feel so thankful that we have a grants team that we get to work with on writing grants to acquire more resources so we can hire more staff to do all of this work. And because of the kind of resource issue, work-life balance can be challenging, especially in the field season. I tend to work quite a lot in the field season. And I know that our restoration coordinator also, gets a lot of overtime in the field season. And so we're working on that. And because it's really meaningful work, it feels okay. And I think we're always talking about how can we build in more work-life balance to this position. And we're also a smaller conservation organization in Colorado, which maybe again ties back to resources. But for example, Colorado Parks and Wildlife's budget was around $311 million, I think, last year. And our budget is $1 million. So I think that also means that we're still working to highlight the fact that Denver Zoo is very much a conservation organization and can be relied upon to do that type of work. And one of the ways that Denver Zoo is working on that is that we rebranded as Denver Zoo Conservation Alliance to make that really front and center for people. And last, I'll add that conservation and restoration work as a career can be challenging. Again, amazing work to be a part of. And it can just sometimes be a little anxiety inducing. But I think it's really helpful to focus locally. Like, what difference can you make locally, even in small ways? Okay, so final thoughts. On some advice for getting into this type of work is that there are lots of opportunities for restoration-focused work with nonprofits, corporations, consulting firms. So if you're even a little bit interested in restoration, I would seek out courses or trainings that focus on that. I do not have a formal background in restoration ecology. I'm a grassland ecologist, which did help with this position. And thinking about it, I was like, oh, I wish I would have taken more classes in some sort of restoration ecology or work along those lines. I would also take time to think about what feels most fulfilling to you. In many ways, I feel like when I was in grad school, I did master's, PhD, postdoc. I was just kind of going with the flow of like, oh, this is what I do next. And then I do this, and then I do this. And maybe not thinking more critically about what other pathways there were available. I was definitely on an academic track, wanted to go into academia, and that was really challenging. It was really challenging to find a job in academia. And so that's when I started, after I have like a whole folder of all the failed jobs that I applied for. And so once I started looking outside of that, that's when, yeah, I saw other opportunities. And so, yeah, I will leave it at that and happy to answer any questions at the end of this. And my email is there if you want to just email me questions.
Thank you so much, Kate,
Yeah,
for your
thank you.
awesome presentation. Because you can definitely see how passionate you are about working at the Denver Zoo. So it's great to hear about all the opportunities that you get through your position. And so last but certainly not least, we have our final panelist presentation by Julianne Heinlein, who is an aquatic ecologist and phycologist for the Great Lakes Environmental Center. So take it away.
All right, thanks, Paige. As Paige mentioned, I'm Julianne Heinlein. I work for an environmental consulting firm called the Great Lakes Environmental Center, and we're based in Traverse City, Michigan. And I think I'm here for the private sector perspective. It's certainly a lot different than NGO work. It's very different than academic work. And there are pluses and negatives to it, just like there are any job. I did not come to it. It was not planned to work in consulting. And Paige and Morgan mentioned she was sure she was going to do applied science. I was not. I got my PhD. I got my master's and PhD in algal ecology, and I kind of took too long of a route to finish the PhD. And when I was coming out, it was at the time where it was getting more and more difficult to find academic positions. You needed a postdoc or two, and I was working on a long-term project doing diatom and algal taxonomy. And this position with the Great Lakes Environmental Center kind of just fell into my lap. And that's how I ended up in the consulting sector, and how I ended up in applied science. And I think we can talk about going into taxonomy is a whole other discussion, as Evelyn knows. And I'm certainly available to talk about anybody who's on that route and wants to talk about it. But I think right now, in the short time we have, I think just talking from a perspective working for a consulting firm in general probably is more beneficial for this talk. And I was kind of sticking with the questions that were suggested, some of the prompts that were suggested by the runners of this webinar, this forum. So a typical day in my job. So I started out as an aquatic, as an algal taxonomist. So my job primarily was to produce taxonomic data for contracts that we get. Most of our contracts at GLEC, GLEC, it's fun to, we have a lot of state contracts, federal contracts. In fact, about 60% of our contracts are federal. And then we work a lot with the state of Michigan, the state of Arizona, all over the country, and we do some industrial work as well. Most of the work we do is we have three primary focuses, and this is going to be similar to a lot of consulting firms. I personally do a lot of bioassessment work. So looking at the biological communities in rivers and streams to get an idea of how the quality of those those watersheds and lakes, streams. And we do toxicology work in our lab, which is another thing that consulting firms do quite a bit. Those are our industrial partners. We basically test effluent to make sure that the industry is not putting out things that they're not supposed to put out. That's mostly technical work. And then we do a lot of drinking water testing as well. We run the national drinking water testing. So that's just a kind of a broad overview of what we do in the consulting firm. My job, as I mentioned, is primarily as an algal taxonomist, but I've expanded into project management, and I do more general aquatic ecology contracts now as well. That's also something that happens in consulting firms. We work on contract. You may come in to do something in particular, and then your options expand because there are things needed, on a particular contract that might get you into something else. I work, the Great Lakes Environmental Center is a small company. So my experiences can be very different from working at one of the large consulting firms like Battelle or something like that. My job as an aquatic ecologist, algal taxonomist, or phycologist is primarily lab and computer-based, like a lot of these jobs are. Although during the summer, I have had several contracts that do take me out in the field. I do a lot of macrophyte surveys, as well as lake testing. My job is not front facing, meaning I don't interact with the public very much. I'm an environmental scientist. I do mostly lab and field-based stuff. My working partners are primarily federal and state environmental staff. I do public presentations and webinars that get me into the public sphere, and I enjoy doing. I do a lot of introductory algal presentations for groups of varying backgrounds. I think one of the things that is beneficial in consulting firms in the private sector is that I think compared to a lot of other environmental science options, my work-life balance is better, especially for considering the pay. My job is a 40-hour per week job, and that's generally what I work. There are hard deadlines and field work obligations that will often require overtime based on scheduling. Often I'm juggling multiple contracts at the same time. But generally I work 40 hours a week. I don't have to spend my weekends thinking about work, which, especially getting older at 54, is becoming very important to me. Our salary for something that I do, I started in at 50,000. That was in 2015. And that was just as a straight taxonomist. Basically, the idea was a technical position. As my experience grew and I took on more responsibilities and doing more jobs, my pay has significantly increased. And GLEC is good to us for the most part. We all have issues, but we're an employee-owned business. So everyone gets stock in the company as the years go by. And when you leave the company or you retire, GLEC buys back that stock. So it's great for retirement savings. And we get a lot of bonuses. Generally, we're doing pretty well as far as compensation. I don't think that is necessarily true across the board with consulting firms, especially depending on what your particular position is. So that's, definitely something to think about. as I mentioned, Gluck's a small company. It's because it's a small company and we do environmental science, I think it's much more relaxed than a lot of other places. The bureaucracy is very small, as opposed to working at a university. My schedule is very flexible. Right now, because I bring in and manage my own contracts, I can essentially set my own time schedule. I can come in when I want. As long as I get what I need to get done, I can set my hours for the most part. The downside of that, of course, is that because I manage all that and everything is flexible and I'm independent, I'm personally responsible for the outcomes of each of those contracts. Making sure everything I provide is quality, making sure that we don't go over budget, everything involved in doing good science under contract. The majority of my time is spent producing or cleaning and compiling data. So I'm either on the microscope or I'm on the computer dealing with the data that I produced on the microscope or in the field. I spend lesser time doing project management. Proposal writing tends to be seasonal, as many of you might know. There are times when things start to be required, and then I do write all my own proposals as well. It's not necessary here. There can be help, but I'm the only one doing what I do here. So I tend to do that on my own. So most of it is producing data and dealing with it. And then I deal with the project management, fulfilling the contracts, developing budgets, providing monthly updates, that kind of thing. I do supervise laboratory technicians. I no longer do things like producing my own diatom slides or checking in samples, things like that. So I do oversee a couple of laboratory technicians, and those technicians are also available to do anything else that I might need help with. What do I like best about my job? I love my coworkers and my contract partners. It is, like I said, it's a very relaxed atmosphere here, very flexible, and it's just a good group of people. It's a small group of people. I think that makes it, I think that's something that I've learned to appreciate. I like the flexible and the casual, but still hard working atmosphere of the Black. It's not always high pressure. The stress is much less, I believe, than a lot of academic positions. The hardest thing to deal with when you're dealing with, if you're thinking about working for a private company, is that you're working on contract. And depending on what your position is, you might not be able to do a lot of science. I don't get to do a lot of scientific analysis. I produce, manage, and summarize data so that other people can do most of the scientific analysis. And I knew that going into it. Certainly it's a trade-off, but it took a considerable amount of attitude adjustment to accept that that's where I was, and that was now my role to play in environmental science. And now I appreciate it. I work with a lot of people that I respect quite a bit, and they have come to respect me as well and value my input on things, and I provide what they need to do good work and to protect ecosystems. So that was my biggest psychological adjustment. And you have to remember that this is not academia. I just want to stress that. It doesn't mean it's bad. And in a lot of ways, I think it's better, but it is different. And working on contract is often tough. It can be boom or bust. So you can have nothing coming in and worry about that because you're not bringing any money in. Or you can be juggling, like I'm doing right now, juggling 4 contracts on my own, with deadlines that I all have to keep, I have to keep an eye on. And often we can't charge what we're really worth because we're competing out there against other consulting firms. And a lot of contract awarding entities are mostly concerned about cost, understandably. But we often get in a situation where, cost versus quality issues. And so we're constantly trying to figure out how, to do the best work we can do without being underbid by, another consulting firm. And the other big thing about working on contract that's different from academia is that every hour that I work is accounted for. I'm on salary. I'm not hourly, but I have to keep track of what to charge each half an hour of my time to. And that can be very disconcerting when you're used to just thinking about how to answer a question and what the best way is to answer that question. And, we can go over and what if we did this and what if we did that? You have to keep in mind your primary goals much more than you would in academia. And that can be difficult to reconcile. Yeah, I think I would, as I mentioned, I didn't plan to go into consulting. And I've had some adjustments, some perspective adjustments through the years. But I've come to really appreciate my position now. I make a good salary for relatively less stress. And I work for a company that I trust for the most part. I mean, nobody's perfect, but I would consider it, particularly considering the difficulty getting into academic positions these days. One thing that I would do differently if I'd known I would end up here is I don't think I would have gotten my PhD. I think I would have stopped at my master's degree. If I had planned to go into state work as well, I probably would have stopped with my master's degree. I'm not saying everyone should do that. I just think that with the current environment, I think it's really important to think about what the PhD is going to provide for you if you're going to go for that level. Be certain that it's something that's going to give you a benefit. And let's see, I noticed something else Morgan said too. Oh, yes. For consulting firms, so you can come in very specialized, or you can come in, at a starting level as a technician and work into a lot of different scientific endeavors. But some things that are going to get you in the door and they're going to give you more options are things like R, program. Everybody should get into that. I don't care what you're thinking about. Start using R. Understanding programming languages. R is free, so you can get on it. If you're not using it currently, you can get on it and just start playing around on it. It's not just statistical analysis. It is amazingly versatile, and people are going to want it, and they're going to be happy that you know how to use it. The other thing that everybody's transitioning into as well is web-based data. So if you can also know how to web program and do things like story maps through GIS and provide your contract entities or whomever with a web-facing, a public-facing spot for your data, for whatever else you're trying to convey. A lot of even government entities are moving towards that, and it's a big seller. And will never hurt for any position. Knowing that is not going to hurt you. It's only going to benefit you. Yeah. Did I speak too quickly? I just wanted
that was wonderful.
Okay.
No,
I just know that when I was going into stuff, I would have really appreciated a very frank kind of discussion of what what it means to do any particular job. So I'm happy to answer more questions and in more detail later. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Julianne. Thank you for the wonderful insight into the world of consulting. And as a fellow algal person, I've enjoyed your photos of all your different kinds of algal mats. So now we're going to move into our Q&A session. I haven't had a chance to pop in there, but please, if you have any questions, and if you have any questions while we're going through this discussion, please drop them in the Q&A section. And so Marty and I will work on starting up conversation between the
So I want to kind of hold the salary discussion for a little while and get a little bit more into the content and paths into some of these jobs. One of the anonymous attendees has a question for Kate. Did you come into the role with much experience or desire for land management?
Yeah, I had experience in grassland ecology, specifically with like field research methods, database management, a lot of work using R, which I'll just echo what everybody else has said about that. It's really important to build that skill set. And I would add on top of that, like just data management more broadly is really important, because that is like a specific skill that you need to build. And I don't think that that's really taught in grad school. Maybe it is now. I was not taught it. It was something I just kind of had to learn through the work that I was doing. And one place to get more skills and training on that is your local library. Librarians are amazing at data management, and they know how to do all of that work. So yeah, your local school library, your local city library, librarians are amazing. In terms of having actual experience with land management, I did not have that specific experience, but I had done a lot of collaborative work in my PhD, and then postdoc was more so really focused on grassland ecology and again data management. But I think all of those things combined really helped with the position that I'm in now. And I did have a desire to do work that was more applied, like Morgan was talking about earlier. Like I really wanted to do more applied work than what I had done historically. And so also wanted to say that, again, going back to what Morgan mentioned about just applying for jobs, even if you don't think that you're qualified, I feel like a lot of times recruiters will just put everything on the list. Like this is everything we're looking for. And now being on the other side of that, we still do that. However, with the caveat of like, some of these things are just going to be what people learn on the job. So we don't even have the expectation that everybody will be able to do all of what we list. It's just, we just want to make sure we include it all. Like this is what we really need. And it's okay if you don't have all of that. So please apply for anything and everything. And that's also how I found the job that I have now at Denver Zoo, is because I applied for a different position at Denver Zoo that I was like, I don't think I'm qualified for this, but I'm going to apply anyway. And what that led to was an interview, and they were like, yeah, you don't quite have all the qualifications we're looking for this job, but we want you to apply for this other job. So that can happen too. So that's why you should just apply for it all.
Awesome. And that's a really nice segue into a question that Annabelle asks. Do you have advice for looking for jobs in conservation and how to leverage graduate student experiences, research, and service to showcase how you might be qualified for these positions? Annabelle says she often feels like she's a smidge underqualified for the job she wants, but has a hard time identifying the mid-level jobs that would let me get experience. And I think anybody that, Jennifer?
Yeah. So this is something, that's a great question, by the way. It's something that I work with a lot of our local undergrad and grad students on. It's just how you do the general search. When USA Jobs has been mentioned, federal and at the federal level. State governments, if you go by, some state governments have their own individual sites. And then each local municipality has its own search that doesn't always show up on, say, a LinkedIn or other job boards. You do, like, searching for jobs, just searching for jobs can be a full-time position in some cases. And so I know that when at different times, either I'd advised or even just, looked in general, finding those organizations that you resonate with and then following them along to see what comes up and partnering that with an information interview, I think is always just a great thing. Something happens. I'm not an advocate for like LinkedIn applications, but that may also be my generation. I've seen where others have had great success with, say, just the applying for as many as you can. I tend to take a targeted approach. In terms of the experience levels, as someone who very early on got a big push in my career because I switched over into the nonprofit world. When you sometimes begin in a nonprofit world, whatever that is, your experience can be a little bit less than, say, in a private sector or in a managerial world. And it is a great way to gain experience. And so if you make a commitment to either begin with volunteer internships, fellowships, standard information, but then look at that nonprofit work, it tends to be a springboard that gives you the right amount of experience to go into other aspects of your career. And it really is because for forever, nonprofits tend to be underfunded. And so once you step in one position, you tend to be able to, if you have some initiative, I want to do this thing in strategic planning, I want to do this thing in budgeting, I want to do this thing in grants, I want to do this thing that's a community engagement. And so it's a great way to sort of build your resume with some supplemental skills when you kind of move in that direction. In some cases, I would say some of your smaller municipal or local governments who have land management needs, particularly following up on some of the questions that were directed at Kate, the resource management, sort of local, state, and federal governments are some of the bigger resource land managers in our planet, sadly, sometimes. And so those are great places to get experience. The challenge is that other than, say, like a USA Jobs, you really have to go into, the city of St. Lucie or the village of St. Lucie to work within their environmental resource management team and see those jobs. It's a very specific geographic location. And those are just some of the ways to kind of broadly look, but you guys may have some things to add.
Do other folks have examples of ways they were able to sell skills that they developed in academia for other job needs?
Yeah, I don't know if I can 100% answer that question, but I think I can at least bridge Jennifer's answer to what you just asked Marty, and I said, Kate, I'm getting excited. I think one of the skills that you will get better at as you apply for more jobs is really carefully reading the job posting and whatever supplemental materials they provide. And this might be maybe everything's electronic these days. I love like a printed copy and a highlighter, and I will like go through the job posting and for state jobs, the duty statement or whatever else they're asking for. And I will go through and I will annotate my hard copy and I will be like, okay, they want, someone who has experience with meeting facilitation. Like what examples can I give of that? They want someone who has experience, giving public presentations. Like what experience do I have of that? And I would say thinking about, doing less of the kind of like, I did a research project, sort of, I gave a talk at like this conference, like those types of things have a lot more value in a more academic track. But like, I like reframing sort of like, what were the skills that you learned or demonstrated? And like, what are the kind of like, deliverables, like what did you produce as a result of that project? Like having that lens as you go through that and not being afraid to put in things that aren't like school or research also, as I started applying for supervisory level positions, I have like mentored people, right? I have like led, local non-profit organization type activities in my community, like showing those kinds of skills, not just limiting yourself to your like science track, but taking a broad look and thinking, if I wrote down a list of every role I've had, be they, academic, professional, local volunteer stuff, like what were those skills and which of those match the things they say they want. And I would look at the whole job posting, not just the required qualifications bullet, not just the desired qualification set of bullets, but like the whole thing. What are they looking for? And how can you explain your specific skills and experience, give them what they're looking for? That's my general advice.
I concur. Yeah. Be very specific. I don't do a hard copy, but I would, copy and paste the whole thing into a Word file and then address each one with potential skills that I have that could satisfy that or experiences. But definitely tailor. If it's a job you really want, tailor your application very well.
Yeah, that's basically what I was going to say. So everybody else has already said. And I would also put like the number of years maybe of that experience. So if you've been in a graduate program for 4 years or something, and you've been overseeing undergraduate students that are part of a lab or just other work that you're doing, you can say like 4 years of supervisory experience and just, translate it to what the job is asking for, which is what everybody has said. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Kate, and everyone.
Yeah, this is a great line of discussion, and I'm really enjoying it. Kind of jumping off of a little bit of what we were talking about. Amit asked, how valuable is previous experience with things like science communication and education towards getting opportunities with conservation or management positions?
I have a little input there. So I talked generally about my role earlier, but in building the relationships, particularly with like members of Congress, to understand the Everglades ecosystem, to understand the issues of the tribe, we had to bring them down, right? We had to go to their offices, visit with them in DC, invite them down, talk to their scheduler, get them to, use their appropriated dollars to take a field trip, so to speak, to see the land. And being able to have our subject matter experts there explain the work they're doing on water resource management, on water quality controls, to explain fish and wildlife and invasive species management, as well as tree island restoration, and also to explain how we're managing and stewarding lands. The tribe, has an area of concern of like 1.2 million acres in South Florida, right? And so we have teams of scientists that do that. So it's been my experience that the ones I value, at least as sort of like a looking back at the people I've hired in the science space, I see communication as vital. I think that, you know, you're gonna have, like, people are going to be applying for these jobs. They're going to have the research credentials. They're going to have experience. They're going to have, you know, their heart's going to be in the right place, you know, more times than not. But I think that being able to communicate clearly clearly and simply what a problem is to a decision maker, and being able to teach people in their ambit about that problem, I think is very vital for getting things done, and, you know, getting buy-in, whether you're applying for a grant or an endowment or whatever it is that you're trying to do. Getting that buy-in and being able to communicate that clearly and simply, I think is extremely important.
Absolutely. And I'll take moderator's prerogative here and say, try and have at least a couple of clips of, like, actual models of things that you have, communications that you have produced that really show those skills.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that. And also, if anyone has any other comments related to that question, I just wanted to ask for the panelists if there are any specific, like, science communication or education opportunities that you had and that really helped you develop the way that you communicate as a scientist, or just some good examples of some, if people haven't really stepped into the science communication or education space, where's a good place to start talking about your science in maybe a less academically rigorous way.
I've had the opportunity to, and now I get asked to do presentations for the general public, introducing either algae or environmental science, or, you know, and there are local groups around. Just volunteer and start providing that information. And once you are put in the position where you have to figure out how to communicate what you're doing to a general audience, it doesn't matter how you're doing that. The fact that you have to sit down and think about it will really hone your communication skills. So that's kind of a tangent, but people love these things. The general public wants to know about this stuff, and there are opportunities to volunteer to do that.
Yeah.
A follow-up on something that Julianne is saying that I've come to learn as an adult is that our local library system actually coordinates information presentations from different members of the general public. And if you're just looking for very simple ways to learn how to communicate what you do or speak on a fun topic, they cover anything. I gave one, and I'm not a plant, I'm not a great plant person, but I did a local one on how to grow succulents on your condo balcony in Miami. And it was, I had fun. I think so. I would say definitely things like that. As it relates to recruiting, though, I would echo some of what Curtis has said. When I have hired in positions, management positions, in both cultural and ecological resource management, I'm looking for how my team can communicate complex sort of approaches to resource management and engage the public. A great way to do that is, how do they talk to kids? How do they talk to, the general public? And if they are, I sometimes can get techie, how we co-mentor each other to kind of speak simply, putting, in sort of a narrative format, a storytelling format, an example standpoint, so that someone who's got that education background, even if it's camp experience, is something that I think is a valuable skill set as you go up into your career experience, even as a tour guide, leading walks through different things. I think that we've all done that in different ways, either for board, for funders, et cetera. But those are important parts of what we do in our science and our management careers.
I was just going to add real quick on top of what Jennifer said. Yeah, I think the two pieces I was going to flag is take advantage of like any formal coursework opportunities that you have in your grad program. Sounds like the LTER also has resources. I took a great course as an undergrad on environmental scholarship and communication. I took a really great course as a grad student. We called it COSIA, Communicating Ocean Sciences to Informal Audiences, where we developed like a grade appropriate ocean activity and then like did presentations at schools and the Cal Poly Peer Open House and that. Jennifer's comment about tours, like I gave tours of my campus as an undergrad student, got really comfortable talking to people, and just any opportunity to practice your communication skills in general will help you with your science communication. Like, so it doesn't have to be a specific, you're talking about science. Any opportunity you have to practice public speaking is going to be valuable. A lot of those skills are transferable, regardless of the subject.
Unbelievably, we're coming up on the end of our time, but I do want to make sure we address Tommy Shannon had, I thought, a really good question about the granting process is clearly very important in many of these roles. And while academic graduate students learn about how to write NSF grants, what is different about the granting process in government and nonprofit entities? And are there good resources that you can recommend for learning more about that?
I'll just say for us as Denver Zoo, we are applying for some of the same grants as academic institutions are. So we are still applying for federal or government grants in general. I will say that there are many other smaller grants that I was not aware of when I was in academia that we also apply for, and they tend to be a lot shorter. They tend to be a lot easier to write, and yeah. So in that regard, if you're getting the experience with grant writing in academia, at least for me, that translated really well to then going to a nonprofit. And I wouldn't say that there are necessarily additional resources. I will say that getting grant writing experience is great and really important. And even if that's you just starting off writing smaller grants that are available like within your own academic institution, if you're not ready to apply for like those larger grants, like any little bits of experience you can get with just sharing the work that you're doing, which we were just talking about in presentation form, but the more that you can write well about that too, that can be really important.
So I'll add to what Kate is doing, because this is building the capacity of county departments and our nonprofit organizations in the community is a big part of what my role is. And if you want to reach out, I can give you some very targeted resources on this. Number one is you should be familiar with grants.gov. And so it is a search criteria that gives federal, state, and local grant opportunities that is searchable by agency, and that is searchable by even keywords. It goes into notices of funding that have gone away and those that are up and coming, so you can begin to build a grant schedule. There are a number of resources on the web that talk to you about what is the best way even to become a grant writer. 100% of the best training to become a good grant writer is to write a grant and write another grant and write another grant. I will tell you, state grants can be 300 pages in length. Yay, so exciting. Federal grants are a little bit easier than I would say state grants. And then, as Kate has mentioned, when you're looking at some of the world of private funders, those applications are far more are far easier to complete. The most important skill in your grant writing is to have a compelling, sort of a compelling story, and don't tailor what you're trying to do necessarily to the funder. Find the funder that meets what you're trying to do. It is the best way to create that, that match in it. And just because I've done a lot of analysis since the beginning of the year as agencies are changing the landscape, federal funding is still available. Well, there may be a shift in how federal funds are out. We are thinking that some of the pauses that are happening are going to open up again in the fall, but there are still lots of grants for individuals, for organizations that come from the nonprofit world, the state world, and the federal world. But I would start with grants.gov, and then there's a couple that work from there, and definitely reach out to me. That was cute. Grant writer, novelist.
Just want to make one last point about grants or proposals in general. They're going to differ not just from NSF to NGO to private sector. They're going to differ between one department at a state level to the next department at a state level. And just like with responding to job solicitations, read that thing through completely, and the proposal, the solicitation, and make sure you hit everything you need to hit. It's just the most important. Yeah. They often specify what they want.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'll add to that what Jennifer and Julianne were saying. Read through it all, and if you feel like the project that you have in mind to apply for that funding for, if that project isn't hitting everything that maybe that granting institution is looking for, don't add a bunch of extra work in. Like, don't add just to fit that proposal, which is exactly what Jennifer was saying. So yes, read through it all and make sure that the project is a good fit and that you're not going to be creating an extra, like a ton of extra work for yourself, or letting down the funder when you can't achieve when you've promised to everything. Yeah, just be really mindful of that. We run into that sometimes where we're like, okay, are we just creating new work, or does this actually fit in with our plans for grassland restoration? We're constantly asking those questions.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Remarkably, we have no questions left other than, I think, the salary questions, which were reasonably well answered in the chat and in the early in the Q&A. And I think all of our panelists have offered to make their emails available. So we will follow up with an email to you all that summarizes the resources that were offered in the chat and emails from all of the panelists. And we so appreciate your time. And I know that attendees are clapping in their offices and in their field locations, and even if you can't hear it, but we're so appreciative.